This is a series of short learning from work-based recordings that I hope offer practical advice on how to go about the conscious, deliberate, and recorded process of being aware of your own learning and keeping a record of it. So let's start with the definition. This is one that I've been knocking about for 30 and more years. A long-term change in behavior prompted by an experience. Tim Russell, Training and Development, the old ITD, if you remember it, magazine. And what I like about this definition, a longer-term change in behavior prompted by an experience, is it's long-term. It's not short-term, it's not fleeting, it's long-term, it's embedded. It's something which has sustainable impact in behavior. So it's behavioral, it's not just acquiring knowledge, it's putting it into practice. And it's prompted by an experience. It doesn't just come from nowhere, it's actually triggered by something tangible and it's attributed to something happening. So I'll start with that. I don't want to get over academic here, I don't want to get too conceptual. It's important, I think, to anchor this and say that if we look about learning, if we talk about learning, if we discuss learning, I think it's important to recognize that learning is behavioral and is long-term and changes behavior positively. So I could choose many models. I'm not going to go into any of these, very few that I've chosen in any great depth. I don't have time. So here is something I think is important if we are looking consciously and deliberately at making the best of the learning around us. So reflection for action, reflection in action, reflection on action. 3 forms, 3 stages, 3 times to reflect, all different for each other, all related and complementary to each other. Reflection for action is about anticipating activity. It's about saying, okay, what's going to happen? What's coming up? Who am I going to see? What am I going to read? What am I going to think about? What meeting am I going to go to? What conversation am I going to have? What training course, if you want to think in those terms, I don't these days very often, am I going to go on? In other words, it's about saying, I'm reflecting for action. It hasn't happened yet. I'm preparing myself so that I'm ready, so that when I see learning opportunity, I will take it rather than being surprised by it. So that's reflection for action. Reflection in action is reflecting while something's going on. Whilst that learning experience, whatever it is, something we're reading, something we're thinking, a conversation we're having, a meeting we're in, whatever it is, because most of our learning comes from unstructured and anticipated events in the workplace or in our wider lives. So reflection in action is beyond reflection for action. Reflection in action is, whilst this is going on, can I see the learning content? Can I detach myself from my involvement in this process sufficiently to at least recognize that there's learning happening here, that there's things going on, maybe that I prepared for if you reflected for action well, in which case it's more likely you'll see and take advantage of the reflection in action. I am going quickly here. Reflection on action is the one we very often only think about. Reflection is something we think about after it's happened. Well, yes, that's okay. But the trouble with reflection on action only is you can't change anything. You can't prepare for something that's already happened. You can't make the best use of something which is also already happened. So reflection for action gets you ready. Reflection in action means you get the most value while it's going on. And reflection on action is about saying, what happened? Did it go like I thought it would? What did I do well? What could I improve? What did I do this time that showed I learned from the last? And those sorts of debriefing things that we could have as a conversation with ourselves. So I'm moving quick. Another model I like a lot, and that has a lot of value in terms of the whole idea of learning from work and of taking advantage of everyday work opportunities to improve our capability, is what I call the difficult learning model. Now, the difficult learning model has 2 axes: learning difficulty, high and low down one side, value to the organization, or if you like, value to yourself down the bottom. So high and low down one side in terms of learning difficulty, and high and low in terms of value to yourself or the organization along the bottom axis. So we have 4 boxes: high difficulty, low value, high difficulty, high value, low difficulty, low value, low difficulty, high value. This is not complex. And the tragedy is, the tragedy can't say it, is that very often I think we comfortably and lazily sit in the bottom left box, low difficulty, low value. We're not going to put ourselves out. I'm not going to expose myself in a high risk sort of way. I'm not going to do anything which could be cause people to think I'm incapable, that I failed at this. So I'll just stick to what I know, low difficulty, low value. If you move up the axis into low value to yourself or organization and high learning value, then you go into high difficulty, low value. Well, that's a tough place to be, because with high difficulty, low value, you really are putting a lot of effort in, put a lot of time in that could have been spent on something else, but you're getting low value back. So recognizing when that could be happening or when you could be about to move into that box is important. Bottom right, we've got low difficulty, high value. So here we have the learning difficulty is low, the value to yourself or to the organization is high, low difficulty, high value. That's a good place to be, because that means that with the minimum exposure to risk, effort, time, you're getting high value back. It's a trick you take years, or I've taken years to develop, to get close to recognizing which of these boxes I'm in, which are the boxes I should stay out of. Am I in high difficulty, low value when I could be moving into low difficulty, high value, for instance? And the top right box is high difficulty, high value. And in reality, we're in all of these at various times. So with high difficulty, high value, there's a high learning difficulty, whatever that means, in whatever context. There's also a high value return. So the difference between that and low difficulty, high value is it's more difficult to achieve that high value. So there you go. I hope that makes sense. It's to do with high and low difficulty, and it's to do with high and low value to the organization. The trick is to manage your expenditure of time, effort, commitment, frustration, confusion, whatever, to get at least beyond the low value, get into the high value boxes. And the one that's best to be in is low difficulty, high value. And of course, the degrees of that. So there's a lot in that. There's a lot in that model. So a further model I like best is what I call the Robinson model. I think that's because I think it's attributed to Robinson somewhere along the line. Anyway, it's 4 levels of learning. It's very straightforward. It starts with unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. So when we're a child, when we're 1, 2, 3 years old, we just don't know that we don't know about a lot of things. We don't know that we don't know about politics and physics and curtains and cars. That is unconscious incompetence. The same is true in the workplace. When we're new to a job, we're full of unconscious incompetence. We just can't be expected to know the things we later will. Then, because it's sequential, we move into conscious incompetence. It's frustrating that we now know what we don't know. Previously, I didn't know what I didn't know. Now I do know what I don't know, and it's a lot. And I want to learn a lot quickly, and I'm frustrated that I can't. It's going to be difficult, all that sort of stuff. So conscious incompetence is an uncomfortable place to be, because it can say, I've got a lot to learn here. But it's also an empowering place to be, because it's about saying, right, where should I start? Who can help me? What can I do for myself? Those sorts of things. So moving from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence is an important step. The next step is conscious competence, presuming that we have reached that. And of course, we can move to and fro here. When we're in conscious competence, it means I can do things I previously couldn't do, but I can only do them by thinking about them, by being deliberate about them, by being conscious. So when I'm learning to drive, I can change gear, but I have to physically think. Now, which pedal is it? It's the left-hand pedal. I put it in, I move the gear, stick to this point. It's when we're doing things that show we've learned something, and only by doing that in a conscious and deliberate way. We haven't yet got to the last one here, which is unconscious competence. Unconscious competence is breathing, at least it is for most people, where we just take breaths. We don't say, breathe in, lungs inflate, exhale. We don't do any of that. We just go, and the same is true for things we learn, for instance, in the workplace. There's a lot that we learn that we just don't recognize. that it's been learned because we think it's insignificant. Very often it isn't. Just because something is not glaringly big and involve quantum leaps doesn't mean to say that it's insignificant. So we tend to learn things in the workplace that move us to the point of unconscious competence incrementally and very slowly and iteratively by going back and forth rather than always in a linear progression. So we go from unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, unconscious competence. It might sound a bit of a tongue twister. It's not. It's a good model and it works. So finally, I just wanted to hang this look at various, but by no means all, learning models by returning to the Honey and Mumford 1982 learning styles, all that sort of stuff, learning cycle. I think it's important to recognize that whatever model of learning you're looking at, learning the process, going right back to my definition, a long-term change in behavior brought about by an experience. Here we see it in the Honey and Mumford terms. And that is having experience, whatever that is, whatever form of experience it is, whether it's anticipated or unanticipated, whether it's formal and structured, whether it's informal, self-driven, whatever, something happens to cause learning to be kicked off. Then we review, we think, aha, look, I've just had a learning experience, because having the experience isn't enough. We've got to actually recognize that that's happened. We've got to review it. We've got to take it apart. We don't think about this consciously about everything we learn, but it goes on nonetheless, unconsciously. So by whatever means and by whatever degree of thoroughness, we recognize and review the learning that's just happened. We draw conclusions. That's not important. I'm not going to think about it further. That's interesting. I'm going to link it to this. That's interesting. I need to take it further. That's difficult. I can park it for now. So they're all different from each other. Having the experience is different from reviewing the experience, is different from concluding and thinking about that experience. And then the planning of application of that learning. Have the experience, review the learning, conclude around the learning, and then plan its application. What good is learning? Well, it's not worthy of the word if it's not used, because we acquire a lot of knowledge, but a lot of that knowledge is not then implemented and applied in the workplace or elsewhere. And planning the application consciously of what has been learned is much more likely to make that learning happen. So I'm stopping myself going further because I could go so much further on all of these. That's really just the first of a 5-part series that lays the ground on learning from work and how best to do this.